Happy, happy Halloween, 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 happy, happy Halloween, Silver Shamrock.
Hey guys, Frightener22 here, welcoming you back to day 22 of my 31 Frightening Days of Halloween Marathon. Tonight we're going to take a look at 1982's Halloween 3, Season of the Witch. This film, which was written and directed by Tommy Lee Wallace, stars the likes of Tom Atkins, Stacey Nelkin, and Dan O'Herlihy. Now, this film, if you asked me about this a few years ago, I probably would have told you that it is like an incredibly underrated cult classic, and that still speaks very true to this day, but I can't really say that it's really as underrated as it was a few years prior, because it seems every single year this film just continues to build and build more and more popularity amongst the fan base. Still undeniably an incredibly great cult classic, but amongst horror circles, I think, unanimously, I think more and more people have been coming around to this film over the years and really recognizing how great and, appealing the story is in this. So the plot of this film deals with, it opens up with a murder of a man, and the doctor that's in charge of taking care of him, played by Tom Atkins, is concerned, about like the cause of his death and why he was gripping onto a mask from this company named Silver Shamrock Novelties. So it isn't until that this man's daughter comes to investigate why her father was murdered. So the two of them band together to do some detective work, if you will, and they stumble upon the Silver Shamrock Novelties factory and realize that the man behind the company, Connell Cochran, played by the great Dan O'Herlihy, they're actually hatching a plan by putting in fragments of Stonehenge into the backs of the three masks that they're selling, which you can actually see on my shirt. These three masks, they're putting chips in the back of them, so on Halloween night, when the commercial for their company plays, it's actually going to turn all of the kids' heads that watch it into like demented insects and lizards and snakes and stuff, therefore killing them. So it's Tom Atkins and Stacey Nelkin's job to put an end to it before tragedy strikes the entire world on Halloween night. Now, I think, it's obvious that everybody's major gripe with this film at the time of its release was it bears the name Halloween 3, but yet there's no Michael Myers. Now, the reason for that, as many of you may or may not know, it's by the time Halloween 2 had come out, John Carpenter had been more or less pretty sick and felt that the whole Michael Myers saga had been told and now it had been pretty tired. So by the time that, Halloween 3 was announced, they decided to switch shifts, and their main direction was to tell, make it more of an anthology type thing, so every year there would be a new Halloween film, but it wouldn't deal with Michael Myers anymore. It would deal with a different Halloween-themed set story every single year. So, looking back on it, I would have, actually liked to see that kind of trend continue for a few years, at least until 1988, when they actually brought Michael Myers back in Halloween 4. But, as I've said, I remember watching this film years ago and immediately dismissing it and hating it just because I was walking into it expecting, Michael to be stalking babysitters still. Much to my surprise, it had nothing to do with Haddonfield, Dr. Loomis, Michael Myers, none of the original characters. This was a brand new story that just simply carried, the name Halloween 3, more or less just to intrigue people and fans into seeing it, which was just, kind of bad marketing in its sense, in the sense there. I mean, honestly, if they would have just taken out the Halloween 3 and named the film Season of the Witch, I think that it probably wouldn't have done massive box office, but it probably would have done, pretty well. I think a lot of people back in the day probably would have caught, a lot of, good word of mouth about this film, because the plot of this film is actually really, really unique and original. I've always, really enjoyed this after I got over, the shock that, like, it bared the name Halloween 3 but didn't have Myers in it. Like, screw all that. I mean, this film is really, really solid. I mean, the story is just, it's a really original one, not one that I feel like I had ever seen done before, so that in itself, especially within the horror community, is always something nice to see, something original, especially these days. But this film just had a really original story, something that you hadn't, seen done before. I mean, at the time of its release, 1982, I mean, the slasher genre was becoming really well prominent. I mean, it was, pretty much a staple every weekend in, theaters across the nation. I mean, Halloween, They had already 2 Halloween sequels up at that time with Myers, Jason with the Friday the 13th franchise was beginning to heat up. You had more and more slashers coming out, such as Happy Birthday to Me, etc., etc. But this one really fell between the cracks because, for what it was, this was an incredibly unique story, and I think that it should never go, unnoticed at all, because it really is. It has all the ingredients to make it a cult classic. You have the great and incredible genre fit Tom Atkins that many horror fans have come to love from such films as Halloween 3, the classic 1986 Night of the Creeps, in addition to Creepshow, Lethal Weapon, and more recently the My Bloody Valentine remake in 3D. He's just really, really solid in this movie, playing the Doctor character, our hero. It's just really, really solid. I really enjoyed his character. The villain in this, Connell Cochran, who's played by, the awesome Dan O'Herlihy, is really creepy, just really foreboding, dark guy, and he really, you really get a sense of something sinister going on at his factory, so he really plays it, really straight and really creepy. In addition, the writer and director of this film, Tommy Lee Wallace, had been chums with John Carpenter for many, many years. He had worked with Carpenter as early as Halloween, so they had been friends for years and years. Tommy Lee Wallace, he actually had played Michael in a scene where, he's, bashing through the closet to get Jamie Lee Curtis out. That's actually Tommy Lee Wallace under the mask at that time. Tommy Lee Wallace, this was, an early film for him, and I think he handles it really, really well. Really solid directing. The script I thought was really well. Like I said, the story was really phenomenal. It's just a really tight story. And Tommy Lee Wallace, as much as, he's not probably the first name that comes to mind when you think of iconic horror directors, he really has, created a really, solid, small but solid resume. Just with Halloween 3 and then jumping to 1989 where he would direct Fright Night Part 2, which is a really solid follow-up to the original Fright Night, in addition to directing the TV movie of 1990, Stephen King's It, which is, I know is on a lot of people's favorite TV movies. So Tommy Lee Wallace has really, left his mark, I feel personally, on the horror genre, just in those 3 features alone, but in Halloween 3 he really does a solid directing job. Now, like I said, some small facts I just throw at you guys. In case you guys didn't know, the original director that was actually, garnered to direct this feature was actually Joe Dante of Gremlins fame. And at the time, he was working with a screenwriter, and the screenwriter was building up the project, and, Dante really wanted to switch shifts and, obviously take the focus off what the first 2 Halloweens were and really deal with the word Halloween and, take that basis and make a script off of it from that. As time went on, Dante got offered other projects, it would seem, and he left the project, and that's when Tommy Lee Wallace was actually brought in. But I find it really interesting that, another, notable horror director, an iconic genre director such as Joe Dante was once attached to this really great cult classic. It would have been interesting to see what Dante would have given to this film. So, all that said, I really think that, this Halloween season, I'm sure it's really easy for everybody to just look at, their collection of Halloween movies and think, well, do I want to watch Michael Myers or do I want to watch this? Personally, I think, how many years, we all love Michael and we love all the films that he's, appeared in, all the subsequent sequels and whatnot, but I think if you're looking for something a little different and just something slightly more unique and original, as to what you've come to know every Halloween with Michael Myers, definitely bust out Halloween 3 Season of the Witch. It's a phenomenal cult classic, and like I said, every year the popularity just continues to rise. If you check it out this Halloween season and you'd never seen it before, then I think you'll truly understand what I mean after viewing it, because this is a really solid film, and as far as cult classics go for me, this is definitely in one of, probably the top 10 on my list. So, as always, guys, thanks again for tuning in to my marathon, and be sure to tune in tomorrow for yet another review. This is Frightener22.